The cold was a thief. It stole the feeling from Alara's fingertips, crept through the thin soles of her worn boots, and slipped under the collar of her threadbare coat. It was a deep, invasive cold, the kind that settled in the bones and refused to leave. From the driver's seat of her decade-old car, the world outside was a beautiful, cruel painting. Snowflakes as soft and silent as a whispered apology fell from a bruised purple sky, dusting the city in a layer of pristine white. It looked like someone had gently shaken powdered sugar over a gingerbread town. Warm, golden lights spilled from the windows of every shop and home, painting cheerful squares on the snow-covered sidewalks. She could see families bundled in thick coats and colorful scarves, their laughter fogging the air in happy little clouds. The distant, faint sound of a church choir singing carols drifted on the wind, a melody of joy that felt a universe away from the silent, chilled interior of her car. Here the only sounds were the frantic beat of her own heart and the quiet, rhythmic shudder of her own breathing. Her stomach was a tight, aching knot. Hunger was a constant companion now, a dull throb that had long since replaced the sharp pangs of the first few weeks. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days, surviving on a half-eaten bag of crackers she'd found tucked under the passenger seat. Her world had shrunk to the 4 frosted windows of this car, a metal shell that served as her home, her prison, and her only shield against the relentless December wind. Her gaze fell to the passenger seat, where a single framed photograph lay. It was of a man with kind eyes and a smile that had once been the sun in her sky. David, her David. In the photo he was holding his violin, his chin tucked into the instrument as if sharing a secret. That violin was in the trunk now, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, the only valuable thing she had left. Everything else, the apartment, the furniture, the life they had built, had been swallowed by a mountain of medical debt after a battle he couldn't win. A single hot tear escaped and traced a cold path down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of a numb hand. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. It only made the cold feel colder. She was a teacher, or she had been, a substitute music teacher drifting from school to school. The job at Northwood Elementary was a temporary mercy. A few weeks of work before the holiday break sent her back into the terrifying uncertainty of unemployment. Each day she would park a few blocks away, put on a brave face, and walk into the warm, noisy school to teach children who had homes to go back to. Then, at the end of the day, she would return to her car, turn the key just long enough for the heater to sputter a breath of lukewarm air and wait. She would wait for the exhaustion to become heavy enough to be a substitute for sleep. She was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a festive, bustling world. Across the street, a man and a little boy emerged from a brightly lit bakery. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, his expression serious even as he adjusted the small, bright red hat on the boy's head. He wore a dark, sensible coat, the kind that spoke of quiet stability. He was handsome in a way that felt solid and dependable, like an old oak tree. There was a faint sadness in his eyes, a shadow that even the cheerful glow of the streetlights couldn't quite erase. The boy, no older than 6 or 7, clutched a paper bag that smelled, even from here, of cinnamon and warm bread. He skipped a little, his boots crunching in the fresh snow, a sound that was crisp and full of life. He was a spark of pure energy, a vibrant contrast to his father's reserved stillness. The man, Marcus, watched his son, a flicker of a smile touching his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. His own grief was a constant, quiet companion, a space beside him that his late wife, Sarah, was supposed to fill. He focused on his son, Leo, providing, protecting. That was his purpose now. Leo was his world, his reason for getting up every morning. The boy had his mother's eyes, wide, perceptive, and full of a startling empathy that often left Marcus breathless. He saw things other people missed. He felt things deeply. Marcus was often guided by caution, by the hard-learned lessons of loss. Leo, however, was guided only by his heart. As they walked, Leo's skipping slowed. He stopped, his head tilted. His gaze had drifted from the cheerful bakery window to the line of parked cars across the street. Specifically, to one car, its windows fogged from the inside, a lone figure silhouetted against the dim interior light. He saw the woman inside. He saw her lift a hand to her face, saw the slight tremble of her shoulders. He couldn't hear her, couldn't see her features clearly, but he could feel the sadness radiating from the car like a cold wave. "Daddy," Leo said, his small voice serious. "Look." Marcus followed his son's gaze. He saw the car, the woman. His first instinct was caution. A stranger. It was late. The city was full of complicated stories, and it was his job to shield his son from the sharp edges of them. "It's nothing, buddy," he said gently, tugging on Leo's hand. "Let's go home. It's getting cold." But Leo didn't move. He stood planted on the sidewalk, his small brow furrowed with a concern that was profoundly adult. "She's crying," he whispered, his voice full of a simple, heartbreaking certainty. "That's my teacher, Miss Evans. She cries in her car every day after school. I see her from the playground window." Marcus froze. His teacher? He'd seen her briefly at a parent-teacher meeting, a quiet, polite woman with tired eyes. He'd assumed she was just having a bad day, a tough week. But every day? The thought sent an uncomfortable chill down his spine, a feeling that had nothing to do with the falling snow. He looked at the car again, seeing it not as a potential threat, but as a vessel of hidden pain. Before Marcus could formulate a sensible adult plan, which likely involved going home and minding his own business, Leo slipped his small hand from his father's grasp. He held the warm pastry bag in one hand, and, with the bravery only a child possesses, he walked directly across the quiet, snow-dusted street. "Leo, wait!" Marcus called, his voice a harsh whisper, but his son was already at the driver's side window of Alara's car. Inside, Alara was startled by the small tap-tap-tapping on her window. She looked up, her heart lurching with a brief, irrational fear. Through the condensation, she saw a small face, framed by a bright red hat, peering in at her. It was Leo, one of her brightest students, a sweet, inquisitive boy who always asked the most profound questions during music class. She fumbled with the window crank, the cold metal biting into her fingers. The window lowered a few inches, letting in a blast of frigid air and the faint sound of carolers. Leo looked at her, his big, brown eyes wide and serious. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask what she was doing. He simply asked the question that was in his heart. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice as clear and pure as a bell. "Why are you so sad?" The directness of it, the simple, unvarnished empathy, shattered the fragile wall Alara had built around her emotions. All the loneliness, the hunger, the grief, and the bone-deep exhaustion she had been holding at bay rushed to the surface. Her breath hitched, her vision blurred. She couldn't speak. Leo seemed to understand. He looked at his father, who was now hurrying across the street, his face a mixture of apology and concern. Then he looked back at Alara. He held up the pastry bag. "This is still warm," he offered. It wasn't just a pastry. It was warmth. It was kindness. It was a small boy seeing her when she felt completely invisible. And then he did something even more unexpected. He turned to his father, who had just reached the car. "Daddy," he said, his voice firm with the absolute moral clarity of a child. "Miss Evans needs a hug." That was it. The dam broke. A silent, shuddering sob escaped Alara's lips. It wasn't a loud, dramatic cry, but a deep, internal collapse. Her body shook with the force of months of unshed tears, of grief held too tightly for too long. She buried her face in her hands, the rough wool of her gloves scratching against her wet cheeks. It was the sound of a heart finally letting go of a burden it was never meant to carry alone. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, the sight of his son's teacher breaking down in the cold, dark car, hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He saw not just a stranger, but a fellow human being at the absolute end of her rope. The cautious, protective shell he had built around his own heart cracked open. He saw in her tears a reflection of his own long nights of silent grief after Sarah had passed. He understood this kind of loneliness. He knelt beside Leo, bringing himself to eye level with the car window. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice gentle, stripped of all its earlier caution. "I'm Marcus, Leo's father. Are you all right?" It was a foolish question, and he knew it the moment he said it. Of course she wasn't all right. Alara could only shake her head, unable to form words. The sobs were coming harder now, a raw, painful release of pressure that left her breathless. Marcus acted. He uncoiled the thick, warm scarf from around his own neck. It was dark gray wool, soft and smelling faintly of cedar and his own clean scent. He didn't try to hand it to her through the small opening in the window. He reached through his large, warm hand, gently touching her shoulder, and draped the scarf over her. The sudden, profound warmth of the wool against her icy skin was a shock to her system. It was like the first ray of sun after a long, dark winter. "Here," he said softly. "Please, it's too cold out here." The simple, practical act of kindness, the follow-up to his son's pure-hearted offer, was overwhelming. It was more than she had received from anyone in months. It was a gesture that said, "I see you. You are not invisible." She slowly lifted her head, her face blotchy and stained with tears. She looked at this man, this stranger, and his small, earnest son. Their faces, illuminated by the warm glow of the streetlights, were filled with a genuine concern that felt utterly foreign and deeply needed. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice hoarse and broken. Marcus's heart ached for her. He knew he couldn't just walk away and leave her here in this freezing car. He couldn't let his son see him walk away. "Listen," he said, making a decision that would change all of their lives. "Our house is just around the corner. It's warm. Please, let us make you a cup of hot cocoa, just to warm up." Alara's first instinct was to refuse. Pride, a stubborn and foolish remnant of her old life, rose up. "No, I couldn't," she stammered, already pulling away. "I'm fine. I don't want to be a burden." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears, but Leo, ever the innocent sage, would not be deterred. He pressed his face closer to the window opening. "Please, Miss Evans," he pleaded, his voice small but insistent. "My daddy makes the best hot cocoa. He puts marshmallows in it, and you can't be a burden. You're my teacher." The simple, irrefutable logic of a child, the earnest plea in his eyes, the memory of the thick, warm scarf now resting on her shoulders. It was a perfect, gentle assault on her defenses. The fight went out of her. The idea of a warm room, of a hot drink that wasn't lukewarm water from a bottle, of simple human company, was an irresistible siren song. Slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. A wave of relief washed over Marcus's face. "Okay," he said, his voice full of a warmth that matched the scarf. "Just follow my car. We're right at the end of the block, the one with the blue door." He and Leo walked back to their car, leaving Alara alone for a moment in the sudden silence. She took a deep, shaky breath, the wool of the scarf soft against her cheek. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his hand on her shoulder. With trembling fingers, she turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed and sputtered to life, a mirror of her own broken-down spirit. She followed the red taillights of their car, a beacon of impossible hope in the encroaching darkness. The house with the blue door was a sturdy two-story brick home, It wasn't grand or imposing, but it radiated a sense of safety and permanence that Alara craved like air. A cheerful wreath hung on the door, and golden light spilled from the downstairs windows. As she stepped out of her car, the cold hit her again. But this time it was different. This time there was the promise of warmth just a few steps away. Marcus opened the door before she even reached the porch steps. The moment she crossed the threshold, a wave of warmth washed over her. It was a physical, palpable thing, a stark contrast to the biting cold she had lived in for so long. The air inside was filled with the comforting sense of pine from a Christmas tree in the corner, and the lingering aroma of cinnamon from the pastry Leo had carried. "Come in, please," Marcus said, his voice soft. He took her thin, damp coat, his fingers brushing against hers. His touch was warm and steady. He hung it on a hook by the door, trying not to notice how light and inadequate it felt. The entryway opened into a living room that was cozy and lived in. A fire was already crackling in a stone fireplace, its flames casting a dancing, hypnotic glow on the walls. Books were stacked on shelves, a child's drawings were taped to the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen, and a half-finished Lego creation sat on the coffee table. It was a home. A real home, filled with the quiet, unassuming details of a life. Alara stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, feeling like a ghost who had wandered into the world of the living. She clutched Marcus's scarf as if it were a lifeline. The sudden transition from her cold, desolate car to this haven of warmth and light was dizzying. Her body, so accustomed to being tense and cold, began to tremble uncontrollably as it started to thaw. Leo, sensing her discomfort, took her by the hand. His small hand was warm and soft in her icy one. "Come see the fire," he said, leading her to the hearth. "It's the best spot." She allowed him to guide her to a plush armchair near the fireplace. She sank into its soft cushions, the direct heat from the fire beginning to seep into her frozen limbs. The trembling slowly subsided, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. It was as if her body, finally feeling safe, was giving her permission to collapse. Marcus returned from the kitchen with a large ceramic mug. Steam rose from it, carrying the rich scent of chocolate. He placed it gently into her hands. "Here," he said. "Be careful, it's hot." Her fingers, still numb, wrapped around the warm ceramic. The heat was a small miracle. She brought the mug to her lips and took a sip. The hot cocoa was sweet and rich, and it slid down her throat like liquid warmth, chasing away the last of the internal chill. A small, involuntary sound of relief escaped her. Marcus watched her from the other side of the hearth, a complex mix of sympathy and a strange, protective instinct stirring within him. He sat down on the sofa, leaving a comfortable distance between them. Leo curled up on the rug by the fire, content to simply be near this new, quiet presence in his home. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a gentle, healing one, giving Alara the space she needed to simply breathe. Finally, after she had drained half the mug, Alara found her voice. It was still shaky, but it was there. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, looking at Marcus. Her eyes, clear now of tears, were a deep, soulful brown, but they were shadowed with a weariness that went far beyond simple fatigue. "You and your son, you've been so kind," Marcus offered a small, sad smile. "Leo is the kind one," he said, glancing at his son with a mixture of pride and love. "I'm just the one who knows how to make hot cocoa." Alara looked down at the mug in her hands. She knew she owed them an explanation, but the story was so heavy, so full of pain. Yet in the safety of this warm room, surrounded by a kindness she hadn't expected, the words began to surface. My husband, she began, her voice barely a whisper. He passed away 6 months ago. His name was David. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her worn wallet, retrieving a small, creased photograph. It was a different one, a candid shot of her and David, laughing on a park bench in the autumn sun. She handed it to Marcus. He took it gently, his gaze respectful. He had a kind smile, he said quietly, handing it back. He did, she agreed, a faint, watery smile touching her own lips. He was a musician, a violinist. He was brilliant. She told him about the sudden illness, the whirlwind of doctors and hospitals, the hope that slowly dwindled and then died. She told him about the medical bills that had piled up like insurmountable snowdrifts, burying them in debt. After he was gone, I tried to keep up. I sold everything I could, the apartment, our furniture, everything, but it wasn't enough. The bank took the rest. Her voice cracked. The car is all I have left. The job at your son's school it was a lifeline, but it ends next week for the holidays. She finally looked up at him, her vulnerability laid bare. I've been living in my car for 2 months. The confession hung in the warm air of the room. Marcus felt the weight of it in his chest. He wasn't just looking at a woman who was having a bad day. He was looking at a woman who had lost everything and was still fighting with quiet, desperate dignity to survive. His own grief, his own loneliness, suddenly felt manageable in comparison. He had this house. He had his son. He had a foundation. She had nothing. A deep, profound empathy washed over him. He knew what it was to lose the person who was the center of your universe. He knew the silence that followed, the way the world kept spinning and celebrating while your own world had stopped dead. He leaned forward slightly, his expression softening completely. I'm so sorry, he said, and the words were not a platitude. They were a genuine expression of shared sorrow. I lost my wife, Sarah, 3 years ago. A car accident. It was his turn to be vulnerable. This house, he said, gesturing around the cozy room. It was so quiet after she was gone. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. If it weren't for Leo... He trailed off, his gaze drifting to his son, who had fallen asleep on the rug, one hand curled near the warmth of the fire. He saved me. Alara looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. She saw the lines of grief etched around his eyes, the carefully controlled sorrow he carried in his broad shoulders. They were two strangers, brought together by the innocent heart of a child, who understood the unique and terrible language of loss. A bond of mutual understanding, fragile yet profound, formed between them in the quiet, fire-lit room. They sat in silence for another moment, the shared weight of their stories creating a strange, new kind of comfort. The immediate practical problem, however, remained. Marcus couldn't, in good conscience, let her go back to that freezing car. Not for another night, not ever again, if he could help it. Alara, he said, using her first name for the first time. It felt natural. You can't go back out there, not tonight. We have a guest room upstairs. The bed is made. It's warm. Please, stay the night. The offer was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. But still the voice of pride whispered, Marcus, I can't impose on you like this. You've already done more than enough. It's not an imposition, he insisted, his voice firm but gentle. It's the right thing to do, and honestly, he added, a hint of his own loneliness showing, this house would be grateful for a guest. Leo would be thrilled. He looked at his sleeping son. He saw something in you, Alara. My son has an infallible intuition about people. He knew you were good. That's all the justification I need. She looked from the sleeping child on the floor to the earnest, kind face of the man on the sofa. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking gratitude. She was making a choice to accept help, a choice to trust in the unexpected kindness of strangers. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Thank you." Marcus led her upstairs to a small, simple guest room. The walls were painted a soft blue, and a handmade quilt was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. It was clean and warm and safe. On the nightstand, he had placed a glass of water and a small folded note. "The bathroom is just across the hall," he said from the doorway. "There are fresh towels, and I found these. They were Sarah's. I think they might fit." He held out a set of soft, worn flannel pajamas. The gesture was so thoughtful, so intimate, it made her breath catch. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He simply nodded, gave her a small, reassuring smile, and quietly closed the door, leaving her alone in the sanctuary he had offered. Alara stood in the center of the room, the soft pajamas clutched in her hands. The silence here was different from the silence in her car. This was a peaceful silence, a silence that promised rest. She changed into the pajamas. They were soft against her skin, and they smelled faintly of lavender, as if they had been stored with care. She walked over to the window and looked out at the snowy street below. She could see her own car, a dark, cold shape under a street lamp. It looked like a relic from another life. A life that had ended only an hour ago. That night, for the first time in months, Alara slept in a real bed. She burrowed under the heavy quilt and let the warmth soak into her, melting away the layers of cold and fear. She slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of restorative rest that only comes when you finally feel safe. Downstairs, Marcus sat by the dying embers of the fire, a thoughtful expression on his face. He gently woke Leo and carried him up to his own bed, tucking him in. As he looked at his sleeping son, he felt a profound sense of rightness. Leo's act of pure, unhesitating kindness had brought a wounded soul into their quiet world, and Marcus knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. The next morning, Alara woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, the soft bed and warm room a stark contrast to the cold, cramped car seat she was used to. Then the memories of the previous night rushed back, and a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost painful washed over her. She found Marcus in the kitchen, a blue apron tied around his waist, flipping pancakes at the stove. Leo was sitting at the kitchen table, diligently coloring in a book. He looked up when she entered and gave her a smile so bright it could have melted the snow outside. "Good morning, Miss Evans," he chirped. "Good morning, Leo," she replied, her voice still a little rough from sleep. She looked at Marcus, feeling a fresh wave of awkwardness. "I thank you for everything." "Good morning, Alara," Marcus said, his smile easy and genuine. "Coffee's fresh, and I hope you're hungry." He gestured to a plate piled high with pancakes. It was more food than she had seen in one place in a very long time. They ate breakfast together at the small wooden table. It felt surreal, normal, the simple domesticity of it, the clink of forks, Leo's cheerful chatter about his drawing, the shared pot of coffee, was a balm to her weary soul. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling life and strength seep back into her. After breakfast, as Marcus was clearing the dishes, he paused. "Alara," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "I've been thinking. The guest room is empty. It's just sitting there. Leo clearly adores you, and I could use some help. He needs someone to be here after school to help with his homework. With the holidays coming up, it would be a huge relief." He turned to face her, his expression open and sincere. "I'd like to offer you a job. As Leo's nanny and tutor, it would come with a salary, of course, and the room would be yours. For as long as you need it, no strings attached." Alara was speechless. a job, a room, a home. It was more than she had dared to dream of. It was a complete and total rescue. "Marcus, I can't accept. It's too much. You're a stranger. You don't know anything about me." "I know you're Leo's teacher," he countered gently. "I know you've been through something terrible, and I know my son trusts you. That's enough for me." He saw the hesitation and fear in her eyes. "Think of it as a practical arrangement. I need help. You need a place to stay. It makes sense." The offer was a crossroads. She could retreat back into her pride and her car, back to the cold and the invisibility. Or she could take this leap of faith, this unbelievable chance offered by a kind man and his perceptive son. She looked at Leo, who was watching them with wide, hopeful eyes. She looked at Marcus, whose gaze was steady and unwavering. She chose hope. "Yes," she said, the word coming out as a shaky breath. "Yes, thank you." A wide grin spread across Leo's face. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. The shadows there seemed to recede, just a little. Later that day, while Leo was engrossed in a cartoon, Ilara wandered into the living room. Her eyes were drawn to an object in the corner that she hadn't noticed the night before. An upright piano, its dark wood polished to a soft sheen. A thin layer of dust covered the closed keyboard lid. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "It was Sarah's," Marcus said softly from behind her. "She used to play every day. I haven't been able to open it since she passed." Ilara's heart ached for him, for the silent monument to his lost love. "She was a musician, too," she said, more a statement than a question. "A pianist," he confirmed, "a beautiful one." Hesitantly, Ilara lifted the keyboard cover. The ivory keys were clean and waiting. With a trembling finger, she pressed a single key. A clear, sad note hung in the quiet air. Then, almost without thinking, her hands found a familiar position. She began to play a simple, melancholic Chopin nocturne, a piece her husband had loved. The music filled the silent house. It was rusty at first, her fingers stiff and out of practice. But as she played, the notes began to flow, pouring all of her grief, her loneliness, and her newfound, fragile hope into the melody. The music was a story that words could not tell. Marcus stood in the doorway, listening, completely captivated. He was watching her passion, her talent, reawaken before his eyes. The music wasn't just filling the silence in the house. It was filling a silence in his heart he hadn't known was there. He wasn't just hearing a sad song. He was hearing the beginning of healing. He was hearing life return to his quiet home. The weeks that followed settled into a new, gentle rhythm. Ilara moved her few belongings, a suitcase of clothes and David's violin, from her car into the blue guest room. The car itself, a symbol of her hardship, was sold for a small sum that felt like a fortune. She officially became Leo's nanny, picking him up from school each day, no longer having to hide her tears. A montage of quiet, happy moments began to build. Ilara helping Leo with his reading at the kitchen table, her patient voice a soft murmur in the afternoon light. Marcus coming home from his architect's office to find the house filled with the smell of freshly baked cookies, a recipe Ilara had found in one of Sarah's old cookbooks. The three of them building a snowman in the front yard after a heavy snowfall, their laughter bright and clear in the cold air. Ilara began to transform. The haunted, exhausted look in her eyes was replaced by a soft, warm light. Color returned to her cheeks. She smiled more, and when she laughed, the sound was like music. She played the piano every day, filling the house with melodies that grew more joyful and complex as her spirit healed. Marcus, in turn, began to change as well. He found himself leaving work on time, eager to get back to the warmth and life that now filled his home. He started smiling more, a real deep smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He watched Alara with a growing sense of wonder and a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge for a very long time. He expressed his growing affection not with words, but with small, thoughtful actions. He noticed her boots were worn through, and a new, sturdy, insulated pair appeared by the front door one morning. He overheard her mention that she missed playing her violin, but felt too rusty, and the next day he left a book of simple violin etudes on the piano. He fixed the loose handle on her suitcase without her having to ask. Each gesture was a quiet testament to the fact that he was paying attention, that he cared. One evening, a few days before Christmas, the school was holding its annual holiday concert. Leo was singing in the children's choir. Alara had helped him practice his part, and the three of them went together. It was the first time they had appeared in public as a unit, a small makeshift family. As they sat in the crowded auditorium waiting for the concert to begin, Leo leaned over and whispered loudly to his father, "I'm glad Miss Evans lives with us now. The house is happier." Several people in the rows around them turned to smile. Marcus felt a flush of warmth spread through his chest. He looked at Alara, who was blushing beautifully under the dim lights. Their eyes met, and in that shared, slightly embarrassed moment, an unspoken truth passed between them. Later that night, after a triumphant concert and a very excited Leo was finally tucked into bed, Marcus and Alara sat by the fire sipping tea. The Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, casting colorful lights around the room. "He's right, you know," Marcus said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "The house is happier. I'm happier." Alara looked into the flames, her heart beating a little faster. "I am too," she confessed, "happier than I thought I could ever be again." Marcus turned to face her more fully. The time for quiet gestures was over. "Alara," he began, his voice low and earnest, "when Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. I built walls around my heart to protect myself, to protect Leo. I never thought I would let anyone in again." Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she listened. "I know," she whispered. "After David, I thought my life was over. I was so afraid to feel anything, because I didn't think I could survive losing someone again." "I'm still afraid," he admitted, his vulnerability a profound gift. "But I think I'm more afraid of letting you go." He reached out and gently took her hand. His was large and warm, and it enveloped hers completely. "You and Leo, you brought the music back to this house. You brought it back to my life." "And you and Leo," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a reason to want to make music again. You saved me, Marcus." He moved closer, his gaze searching hers. "I think," he said softly, "we saved each other." He leaned in, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. She leaned forward to meet him. Their first kiss was not one of fiery passion, but of quiet, profound relief. It was gentle, hesitant, and deeply emotional. It was a kiss of gratitude, of shared understanding, of two broken hearts finding a way to beat in rhythm again. It was the taste of a second chance. As they pulled apart, a small sound from the hallway made them jump. Leo stood there in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, a teddy bear clutched in one hand. He wasn't upset or confused. He just smiled, a sleepy, knowing smile. "See, Daddy," he said, his voice full of innocent wisdom. "I told you. Hugs fix everything." Then he yawned, turned around, and padded back to his room, his mission complete. Marcus and Alara looked at each other, and a shared, soft laugh broke the emotional tension. His son, the catalyst, the innocent sage, had given them his blessing. 6 months flew by in a blur of happy, ordinary days. Spring had melted the snow, and the garden in the backyard was now bursting with flowers that Alara and Leo had planted together. Alara was no longer just a nanny. She was a partner, a co-parent, the heart of their home. She had started giving private music lessons from the house. Her passion now, her profession once more. The sound of her violin or the piano was a constant, joyful backdrop to their lives. One bright, sunny Saturday afternoon, Marcus told Alara and Leo they were going for a special drive. He didn't say where. They drove through the familiar city streets until he parked in a spot that made Alara's breath catch in her throat. It was the exact spot where her car had been parked that snowy December evening, the spot where her life had changed forever. The street looked different now, bathed in the warm light of a June afternoon. The trees were full and green, and the bakery on the corner had its windows wide open. "I wanted to come back here," Marcus said, turning to her in the car. "I wanted to remember the moment my life started again." He got out of the car and came around to open her door. He took her hand and led her to the sidewalk, to the very place where Leo had tapped on her window. Leo, understanding the gravity of the moment, stood quietly beside them. Marcus turned to face her, his eyes full of a love so deep and certain it took her breath away. "Alara Evans," he said, his voice steady and clear. "6 months ago you were a stranger crying in a cold car. Now I can't imagine a single day of my life without you. You are the music, the warmth, and the joy in our home." He dropped to one knee on the concrete sidewalk, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a single sparkling diamond. Alara's hands flew to her mouth, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "You came into our lives and you healed us," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me from a life of silence, and I hope I've helped you feel safe and loved. I want to do that for the rest of my life. Will you marry me, Alara? Will you officially make our little trio a family?" She couldn't speak. She could only nod frantically, the tears flowing freely. "Yes," she finally managed to choke out. "Yes, Marcus, 1,000 times, yes." He slid the beautiful ring onto her finger, where it fit perfectly. He stood up and pulled her into a fierce, loving embrace, kissing her deeply right there on the sidewalk where they had first met. Leo, who had been watching with a huge grin, clapped his hands together. "Does this mean I can call her Mom?" he asked, his question cutting through the emotional moment with perfect, innocent timing. Marcus and Alara both laughed through their tears. Marcus knelt and pulled his son into their hug. "Yes, buddy," he said, his voice full of happiness. "Yes, you can." That evening, the newly engaged family sat on their porch, watching the sunset. The air was warm and smelled of roses from the garden. Leo was nestled between them, his head resting on Alara's lap. Alara's hand was in Marcus's, the ring on her finger catching the last golden rays of sunlight. She looked at the man beside her, the man who had seen her at her lowest and offered her a lifeline. She looked at the boy who had approached a stranger's car with nothing but empathy in his heart. She thought of the cold, the hunger, the utter despair of that December night, and it felt like a story about someone else. This was her life now, a life filled with warmth, laughter, and music, a life she had never thought possible, a life built on a single, pure, and unexpected act of kindness. It was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest, coldest of nights, a little light can appear, and a little warmth can be offered. And sometimes that is all it takes to save a life, to heal a heart, and to build a family where there was once only emptiness. The past was a scar, but the future was a symphony waiting to be written, and she finally had her orchestra.